Take your Bibles and turn to Genesis 38. Genesis 38. Actually, 39 is where we'll begin here this morning. This last week, my wife and I had the privilege since Monday night, well, really Tuesday morning, to have our grandson at our house, where his mom and dad came up for a little bit of the time, but we were responsible for a few days for him, and we spent a lot of time. It was so much fun. There were so many different things, and what I found is he likes me more than he likes all the other one. Well, I don't know if that's the case, but it was a joy. But one of the things we are reminded of is how we often act before God. By watching my little grandson, he's 18 months old, and he is a very strong-willed little boy. He doesn't necessarily just go with the flow. He has his own mindset. For instance, we were at the park in Glen Arbor, and he was across the park from me, and he was looking at me, and he was calling out to me. He calls me Papa, and he's calling out to me. And I said, "Come on over," and he starts crying, and finally his mom brings him over to me, and he's still crying, and he's waving his arm. I couldn't figure out what it was. Basically, he wanted me to get off the swing set I was on to go play with him on the playground. But he can't talk, so he says a few words. And so anyways, it's quite interesting. But one of the things we found was very difficult was he doesn't like to ride in the car seat. And many times he's happy where he's at, and yet we're going to take him somewhere else. Like yesterday, we were going to go for a whole day at the beach. And we know he would love the beach and love playing in the water. And he doesn't understand when we say we're going to the beach. He just knows that he likes playing in the dirt where he was at the campground. And he's just playing there. And we're like, okay, it's time to get in the car seat. Well, you can't really reason with an 18-month-old kid. They just don't understand the process. And trying to tell him, look, you're going to have so much fun at the beach. Just go in your car seat. And he's kicking and he's screaming and he's fighting. And it just reminds me so much of what we do before God. God has these great plans for us, and yet we're content right where we're at in our own little area. And when we go through difficulties and God puts us through different things, we often tend to kick and scream and to fight, not realizing that God has really this plan that's so much better for our lives. Why? Because God is so much greater. He knows so much more than we do. And there were many, many times, it seemed over and over this week with our grandson, that we're like, if you would just listen to us, we have something that is really, you're going to enjoy it so much more. Now, he didn't understand that. We as people many times don't understand that before God. And God is like, okay, just want you to trust me because I have something that is so much better for you. We're going to see the example of this here from the life of Joseph. If you've been with us in our study, we've been going through the Old Testament beginning in Genesis, and we saw Abraham and then Isaac and his son Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons and a daughter, and we looked at Joseph last week and what happened to Joseph. So Joseph was most loved in the family above his 10 brothers, probably equally with Benjamin. We're not really sure about that. But Joseph and Benjamin were the sons of Rachel, Jacob's beloved wife, who died giving birth to Benjamin. And Jacob treated Joseph with more favor than the other kids. They didn't like it, and we call them kids, but at that time they would have been much older, 30s and 40s, his brothers, and he was 17, and there were great problems. Eventually his brothers sold him into slavery in Egypt. We looked last week how he ended up going down into slavery to serve Potiphar, which was the captain of the guard. Things went well for him there until he was accused by Potiphar's wife of him trying to rape her, but she was actually the one that was trying to get him to lie with her. He ends up in jail. And that's where we pick up our narrative here today in Genesis chapter 39, verse 22. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Now, we talked about that this last week. We're going to see it again this week. Is Joseph, through every setback, every trial, every heartache, he still trusted in God. This is so important to understand, because we are going to go through trials. We're going to go through difficulties. We're going to go through hard times. But do we do it kicking and screaming, or do we do it trusting in God? I know that Joseph did this trusting in God, because everywhere he went, he was exalted, he earned favor, and he wasn't a bitter, angry person. In fact, we're going to see this at the end of the message today from the names that he names his children. We'll see it next week as his brothers come back to visit him. Through this whole process, where every time he was knocked down, he trusted, Roman numeral number 1, that God was in control of all the affairs of men. This is an overriding theme of the Old Testament. The Old Testament scriptures reveal that God is in control of the good, and also when evil happens, God is still in control. This is important for us to remember, that just because evil happens doesn't mean that God neglected it, God forgot about it, but God actually uses those things. Letter A, God can use the wrongs of men to accomplish his plan. This is something that's clear many times in the scripture, how God can take seemingly bad things, or when people do bad things, or things that harm us, and turn it around for good. About 7 years ago, my oldest daughter got married in Wisconsin, and we traveled there. In fact, it's very interesting, because if you go straight across the lake here, almost a little bit to the north, it's only a little over 100 miles. But it's a 340-mile drive to get there. So we headed there with our van. At that time, I was also driving Uber on the weekends here for extra income. And I got there, and I was going in the morning to get donuts for our family. And as I was driving there, a deer ran out of the cornfield right in front of me, and I just smacked it. Pretty much totaled the van. Now, I was able to limp it back home, but I realized back to my in-laws' house, I realized there's no way I was going to make it back here to Michigan. Eventually, we got somebody to bring a vehicle with us, and we got back here, and now I had the process. We needed a van. One, I needed to drive Uber at the time, because I needed to make money to support our family, and that's one of the things I was doing, and I needed a vehicle. And long story short, I was viewing this as a very negative thing. God, why would you allow this to happen? This problem, I need the vehicle. We're here. We're just paying for a wedding. I need this. Well, we ended up finding a vehicle. The insurance came in. Long story short, I actually made $1,500 running into this deer. I'm like, that's pretty good, because the vehicle I got was a nicer vehicle for a less price, and I actually made money because of what the insurance company gave me. And I remind myself that there's many times that things seem to be so negative, and yet God is using those things because he has something greater in store for us. Even when it comes down to things that people do wrong against us. Look at chapter 40 of Genesis, verse 1. Sometime after this, so we know he was in prison for a little while, or in jail for a while. Sometime after this, the cupbearer of the king of Egypt and his baker committed an offense against the Lord, the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was angry with his 2 officers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And he put them in the custody of the house of the captain of the guard, in the prison where Joseph was confined. The captain of the guard appointed Joseph to be with them, and he attended them. God uses the wrong acts of these individuals, the baker and the cupbearer, to the Pharaoh, the leader of Egypt at that time. And whatever they did, we don't know. Whatever it was, God used this in his plan in order to eventually, we're going to see, help deliver Joseph. But it needs to be noticed that God doesn't rush things like we do. Now, I am a very time-conscious person most of the time. I'm always watching my clock. In fact, one of the big problems we have right now is we have a big clock in our living room, and we don't realize how many times we look at that clock until it's broken or gone. For a while earlier this week, it was stuck at 10 to 6. And we finally had to take it down because it kept throwing us off. We were late to different things. And so we took it down, and I'm constantly looking at that empty space and realize how much I watch this. Now, one of the problems with me is I try to cram too much into little spots and little time. The problem is I'm not always by myself because I also have to take my wife places with me. Well, she watches time too, but she doesn't watch it like I do. I watch time like this. Okay, come on, we got to go. We got to get going. We got this plan. And she's busy getting ready and finishing the things and finishing that task and all that. And I know the plan, the time, and it sometimes works well, and other times it's a little struggle. Sometimes we're just rushed in everything we do, and we get this idea that God, you got to do it now, God. We got to hurry. We got to get this going. But God's timetable is often different than ours. Look here at the end of verse 4. It says, they continued for some time in custody. So the baker and the cupbearer are for some time, for a decent amount of time in custody. Why didn't God just use what's going to happen, we're going to see, and deliver him right away? I believe it was God was giving opportunity for Joseph to establish a rapport with these two individuals so they would be willing to tell him their dream, so he could interpret their dream, as we're going to see in a minute. And I think God was taking this time to build relationships. This is one thing I found and I've had to learn. Statistics say that the average tenure of a pastor at a church is about 5 years. Some of the times it's because the pastor chooses to leave because people aren't changing after 5 years. Other times the church tends to kick the pastor out because things aren't changing after 5 years. But it's interesting because God's timetable is often different than ours. And what I've experienced personally, it's the longevity. It's building relationships over time and letting God do work. In fact, I was looking back and thinking about this when I started. When I first moved here in 2012, and 2013, I started coaching the soccer team, the boys soccer team at the public school. At that time, I had a vision and a plan. I'm going to coach the team, and some of these boys are going to come to Christ, and there's just going to be this great thing that happens. After 6 years, I kind of got done coaching the boys team, and by that time, there was only really one person who I believe was really going to follow God with their life and be committed to God, and that was my son. And I'm like, oh, God, what are you doing? You know, I spent all this time and effort. Did I waste that? Well, to me, this is a great joy because I love the story because 2 weeks ago, we welcomed Cam, our assistant pastor, who was one of the boys on that soccer team. At that time when I first started, he was an unbeliever, and God brought him to faith, and then eventually now he's helping serve here as our church's assistant pastor, and it was the process of time. So often we want to rush things along. We want to get it done and get it done now. If we don't see it now, we're going to move on to something else. God's timetable is not that way. But letter C, he will make things happen in his time. Look at verse 5. One night they both dreamed a dream, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in prison, each his own dream, each dream with its own interpretation. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were troubled. So he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in custody, "Why are your faces downcast today?" Now you may overlook this if you've read through the story, but how did Joseph know what was going on in their personal lives? I believe Joseph was investing himself into these different individuals that he notices there's a problem. And I think this is why God didn't have things happen right away, because it was the time that was needed to develop relationships with these men, that they were willing to tell him about their dreams, the things that are very much hurting them. Verse 8. They said to him, "We've had these dreams and no one's able to interpret them." And Joseph said to them, "Do not interpretations belong to God? Please tell them to me." What I want to note from this is Joseph wasn't sulking about all the problems that have happened to him. What is he doing? He's caring for other people. He's in charge of these other prisoners. How did he get there? He remained faithful to God, and God was continually blessing him even through his difficult circumstances. Now, if you've read through the story, and I encourage you to read through it on your own, as basically, many of you are familiar with it, maybe you're not, but what happens is the butler or the cupbearer has this dream, and the meaning of it was that he was going to be in 3 days restored back to Pharaoh. The baker has this dream, but in 3 days he was going to lose his life. And after 3 days, it came true exactly as Joseph said it was going to take place. But what I want to see, letter D, is God will not forget about us. So after the butler's dream, or the cupbearer's dream, was interpretive, Joseph said this to him. Look at verse 14 of chapter 40. Only remember me when it is well with you. And please do me the kindness, mention to me to Pharaoh, and so I can get out of this house. For I was indeed stolen out of the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing wrong that I should be here in this pit. Now he went to use the term house and pit, probably as a reference to where he's at in this jail. Whatever this condition of this jail was, probably wasn't the greatest condition. And he says, please say something to Pharaoh about this, because I don't deserve to be here. God knew he was there, but what does the butler do? Verse 23. Yet the chief cupbearer or butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. So Joseph thinks, I have hope, I might get out. But what does the cupbearer do? He's excited, he's back serving Pharaoh, and he completely forgets about Joseph. Until when? Look at chapter 41, verse 1. After 2 whole years. So now it's 2 years that he forgets about him, and now 2 years takes place, and that's where we have Roman numeral number 2, that God is the one with supernatural ability. Chapter 41, verse 1. After 2 years, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. And behold, there came up out of the Nile 7 cows, attractive and plump, and they fed in the reed grass. And behold, 7 other cows, ugly and thin, came up out of the Nile after them, and stood by the other cows in the bank of the Nile. And the ugly, thin cows ate up the 7 attractive, plump cows, and Pharaoh awoke. Then Pharaoh has another dream. I won't read through this, but basically he has a dream where skinny stalks basically eat these plump stalks, and the plump stalks grew first. He doesn't know what these dreams mean, but he knows that God is trying to tell him something. And in this process, we see, letter A, that Joseph gave all glory to God. Verse 16. Joseph answered Pharaoh, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh a favorable determination, a favorable answer. So what takes place? Pharaoh has these dreams. The cupbearer remembers Joseph and says, hey, there was this man when I was in jail. He told me what would happen. This is interpretation. Pharaoh has him brought out of jail. He stands before Pharaoh, and Joseph basically says, look, I can't do it, but God can do it through me. What a great example. We see this often in the Old Testament. Individuals who have the ability to do supernatural things in certain times, in certain situations, certain places, but they give glory to God, saying, look, it's God who allows it. And letter B, Joseph was given the ability to interpret. Joseph was given the ability to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Verse 25, chapter 41, verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he's about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dreams are one. The 7 lean and ugly cows that came up after them are the 7 years. The 7 empty ears blighted by the east wind are also 7 years of famine. As it was told Pharaoh, God has shown to Pharaoh what he's about to do. Long story short, basically there's going to be 7 years of abundant amount of food, and then there's going to be 7 years of famine. So Joseph was not only given the ability to interpret the dream, but he was also given wisdom by God. Look at verse 34. Let Pharaoh proceed to appoint overseers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt during the 7 years of plenty, and let them gather all the food during these years, and the food will reserve, and basically goes on. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to save up the food in the first years, and then we'll have plenty of food when the famine comes to the land. And ultimately we see, letter D, that Joseph was rewarded for his faithfulness to God. You can read these for yourself later on, but verse 37 and on, basically, Joseph is rewarded by Pharaoh and is exalted to the spot of second in command of the nation, put in charge of gathering the food and saving it during the 7 years of plenty to prepare for the 7 years of famine. But what I want to note is verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. Remember how old Joseph was when he was sold into slavery? 17 years. And I believe one of the reasons we're given these numbers is to remind us that sometimes we have to suffer for a while till we're exalted. For 13 years, Joseph had no idea what was going to happen. He was sold into slavery. He's never going to see his family again, he thinks. He doesn't know what the future holds. He doesn't know what God's doing. All he knows is he's trying to be faithful to God, and every time he's faithful to God, something else bad happens. But yet Joseph remained faithful to God, and finally, after 13 years, he's rewarded, pulled out of prison. Not only that, but in a rags to riches story, now he's placed second in charge of the kingdom of Egypt. But I want to emphasize the 13 years. Because so often we want God to do it right here, right now, this exact way, exactly the way we want it done. And we're not willing to wait on God. I think about that often. I use the illustration many times. Joseph had no idea what was going to happen when the prison walls were all around him. We know the end of the story. But Joseph didn't. Yet he remained faithful to God. And we see, Roman numeral number 3, that God can cause us to be faithful through our trials, or fruitful through our trials. Joseph now starts storing up food. In the meantime, he's married. His wife gives birth to a son. Verse 51 of chapter 41, what does he do? Joseph calls the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me to forget all my hardships of my father's house. He says, look, God has made me to forget. Now, this doesn't mean he didn't remember them. It basically means that, look, I'm not going to hold it against them. God has shown me why he did what he did. I can trust God, and he names his kid Manasseh. Then he also gives a second name. So the first thing we see, letter A, is God gives us the ability to forget our pain from the past. Now, this doesn't mean he completely forgot he was sold into slavery, like it slipped his mind. Oh, I slipped my mind that my brothers betrayed me and sold me into slavery, and that my dad, I might never see him again. It doesn't mean he forgot that. It means he wasn't going to bring it up again. There's so many people who live in the pain of past problems, past difficulties, past hurt. And yet they forget to see and fail to see that God has a plan. The second thing we see, verse 52, the name of the second he called Ephraim. For God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction. Letter B, God can cause us to prosper when we remain faithful to him. He says, look, God has made me fruitful even through my problems and trials. He's made me forget the past, and now I see something greater. If you're going through a trial right now, a difficulty, hang in there, hold on, because God is there with you each step of the way. In conclusion, I want you to ask yourself these questions. First, do you realize that God is in control of everything? God has it all under control. God doesn't have an instance where it's like, oh no, I completely forgot about that. I completely didn't know that would take place. No, God has this complete control. And we need to trust him. Even when people do evil things to us, He doesn't want you to get trapped in this bitterness and anger. Well, you don't understand what they did to me. By the way, Joseph is kind of a picture of what Christ was going to be. What happened to Christ? Christ lived a sinless life, a perfect life, and he was rejected by his own people. He was beaten. He was crucified. And yet what happened in the end? He rose again from the dead, victorious, to give us life, to give us hope. Joseph was a picture of the deliverance of his people. We'll see next week, just as Jesus Christ has delivered all men from their sins. Secondly, are you allowing God to work through you? Joseph didn't say, well, step aside here. I'll tell you what the dream means. He says, I can't do it, but God will give me the interpretation. God will help me. It's not us who do it. It's God who works through us. And lastly, do you understand that God is using your trials to make you fruitful? James chapter 1 says, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that ye may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. God is using your trials, your difficulties, to make you a better servant for him, to bring about fruit, to bring about good things and wonderful things for your life. So when you go through trials or difficulties or hard times, think about Joseph. Understand the importance of remaining faithful. Continue in it. Continue to follow God, and knowing that God has something waiting. We might not see the reward on this earth, but in eternity we'll be able to look back and realize that God was there each step of the way. I want everyone to bow your heads and close your eyes. We won't take a long time here. I know it's sprinkling, but just take a moment and let God speak to your heart and mind here this morning.